Good afternoon / evening. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us here today for the National Centre for Asbestos-Related Diseases annual meeting that we're giving to you guys in the community engagement part of things. We've got people online as well joining us, so thank you very much for those joining online. We really appreciate it and appreciate you trying to get here as best as you can. Today we've got quite a nice little lineup of talks today. We've got a bit of a rearrangement in the way that we're actually giving them. So we're going to have first up, we're going to have Dr. Melvin Chin, then Jenette, and then we're going to end up with Yarlalu at the end giving a talk. I know a lot of you, mesothelioma is near and dear to your hearts, and it is for us here at the National Centre for Asbestos-Related Diseases. A few of us have just been away recently to the International Mesothelioma Interest Group meeting, which is the largest sort of group gathering of researchers and clinicians to talk about mesothelioma. And while the rates have sort of steadied to a plateau here in Australia, you know, the extensive mining operations and the amount of it in the environments mean that it's going to be a problem for years to come here. But what we're seeing worldwide is that there's going to be big problems in a lot of nations where there isn't actually even the facilities to diagnose or acknowledge the fact that mesothelioma is a disease and that asbestos is a problem within the workplaces. So I think it's really important that we keep doing the work that we're doing here. And as NCARD is one of the largest, if not the largest, sole centre for mesothelioma research, it's really important that we keep on doing this work collectively so that we can hopefully improve the lives of not just people in Australia, but internationally as well. I just want to make sure, first off, that we do a bit of an acknowledgement of country. We are situated here on Noongar land, and the Noongar people do remain the traditional custodians of this land, and we just want to make sure that we acknowledge that that is the case here. And first up today, we are going to have Dr. Melvin Chin, who's one of the clinicians over at Sir Charles Gairdner Hospital, giving a talk today. He's also a clinician researcher. He's been awarded many grants, including a fellowship with RAIN to do amazing work, does a lot of great computational work, really understanding the genetics and the intricacies of mesothelioma disease and how that the genetics sort of relates to treatment responses. So I'll let Melvin come up and give his wonderful talk. Thanks. Great one. Showing up on the screen. There it is. So good. Thank you as well. Thanks, Melvin.
Thank you. It's a familiar audience, which is really nice. And thank you as well for the introduction. Appreciate everybody spending the time after 5 o'clock here just to listen to this talk. So I'm very grateful for that. I've titled the talk New Approaches to Asbestos-Related Disease with Science, Care and Community as a sort of context for that. But of course, the way the talk is structured is just from a patient-centric standpoint. What we'll do is we'll talk about mesothelioma and 4 key messages about this disease, 4 themes that I'd like to update everyone on, both from a researcher standpoint as well as from a patient standpoint. And we'll talk about these 4 themes in sequence. The first being hope, the second theme being personalization. The third is essentially a call to participation in clinical research. And number 4, what understanding this disease means both at individual levels and at community levels as well. So sorry, yeah, my bad. So we'll talk first about hope. And one of the things about these annual lectures is that the messaging shifts according to the research ecosystem that we live in. And of course, 10 years ago, this talk would have been quite different if it were done then. And of course, now it is different. And from year to year, there are iterations of this talk where the messaging shifts slightly, reflecting what developments there are in the research areas and the clinical areas. And I think the core message here is that survivorship is improving for mesothelioma. So for instance, to use a very concrete example, if this was 10, 15 years ago with the more aggressive variants of mesothelioma, we would essentially have a discussion in the first patient meeting with a diagnosis with more aggressive mesothelioma about prognosis. And prognosis would usually be very practically and very respectfully described, sometimes in a matter of weeks to short months. Now, of course, it's a very different environment, a different atmosphere where we conduct these discussions. And essentially, the first clinic sessions repeatedly are becoming more a meet and greet, an information gathering, and a treatment navigation session. So things have shifted gradually across the years. And that reflects the fact that treatment options have expanded significantly. Where we didn't have options before for the more aggressive variants of mesothelioma, we do have treatments which do better now. It's still an incurable disease. It is still a terminal diagnosis, but essentially there is a message of hope which is perhaps blossoming as time goes by, although slowly. And of course, what that means with these different treatment options is that people are living longer with better quality of life. Good treatment is not synonymous with toxic treatment. And essentially, the fact that there are more treatments available means that we can not only provide better quality of life, better outcomes for these patients, but that we can actually tailor treatments or personalize them, which we'll talk about a bit later, to what the patient wants. And therefore, and one of the major discussions in clinic is, how does this impact what I do on a day-to-day basis? And the fact that we can provide additional longevity with better quality of life is a paradigm shift. Now, there's as well, a lot of you know, being researchers and patients and family members in the audience, there are new therapies. And essentially much of this is the bulk of what this organization does. But the main thing, then the key take home is that if you look collectively across the ecosystem of research, clinical as well as translational, new therapies are showing promising results. And what we now know with more technology, more understanding, more science is that this is just the beginning of what will be extremely personalized therapy for mesothelioma in the next 10 years. And of course, when you have more options, what that means is that it means that we can actually overcome that message of futility which pervaded how we used to think about it 10 to 15 years ago. So I used to have 10 to 15 years ago people coming into the clinic and saying, look, I've got mesothelioma, I'm going to die. Just tell me how much time I've got. I'll go sort out my affairs. But this message doesn't appear anymore. Patients don't tend to say this. They're diagnosed earlier. Their disease burden is less. They're healthier when they start treatment. They live longer. And therefore, early detection and personalized care is actually making a difference now. Now, it's just to reiterate that now, instead of one option, let's say 10, 15 years ago, it was just chemotherapy. It is still a very important option. It's a very effective option still. But now there are 3 types of treatments. And how we use these 3 types of treatments and how we tailor it to our patient cohort is essentially a work in progress. But of course, that personalization is not something that injects uncertainty. We can help navigate that. It actually provides options, more substrate for discussion, and actually a more meaningful outlook on what it means to have this diagnosis. Now, again, I've said before that aggressive variants now have better options. All right. So what this means is that whilst we used to dichotomize mesothelioma into the slowly growing mesotheliomas and the rapidly advancing, rapidly progressive disease, which had dire prognoses, the lines are now blurred. And essentially one of the things that was observed more recently from these recent meetings with all the clinicians who specialize in mesothelioma is that there's a leveling of the playing field now with the more aggressive variants, not necessarily implying that prognosis is poor. And some of these treatments actually mean that patients are surviving even in our clinics and in Western Australia and in clinics interstate as long as the slowly growing mesotheliomas. So it blurs that distinction now, and that's a good blurring. All right. And of course, even the more aggressive mesotheliomas, there are clinical trials which offer innovative approaches. And in fact, it's not just injections of treatment now. Some of these clinical trials are offering combination therapies with radioisotopes, for instance. Some clinical trials are offering therapies which are only informed by which wouldn't have been able to be done before because we didn't have the molecular profiles of these tumors back then. But now we do, and therefore we can actually offer these choices and about wider selection of treatment options in these early phase clinical trials. So the summary of that is that the challenges now, while still there, they're surmountable. There's new targeted therapies showing promise. There's a better understanding of tumor biology, and aggressive disease does not mean a quick and terminal prognosis. And of course, what that means is that now, with more therapies, the first-line therapies are actually established now across the world. Well, we couldn't say that 5 or 6 years ago, but we can say that now. And now the focus or the shift is actually towards treatment after relapse. So we now know that there are treatment options that remain effective after relapse, and really there's a selection of approaches which can be tried for that. So the take home from the patient family perspective is that, yes, just because you've progressed on one treatment doesn't mean that all is lost. Actually, there's one treatment and then the next treatment and the treatment after that. And really what we see with our exceptionally long-term survivors is that we see them pivoting from one treatment to the other as the disease moves in order to provide control while still protecting their quality of life. And now research continues to expand choices in second-line therapy. There will likely be at least 3 trials which will open next year for relapse disease as well here in Western Australia. So the next thing is personalization, and the messaging has expanded as well for that. But the key point here is no one size fits all. Yeah. So for the patient, what I usually tell them is that everybody's disease is different. We know that. Yeah, biologically, we know that. Clinically, we know that. The patient needs to realize this as well, that they're special. All right. And because everybody's disease is different, the treatment plans are not one size fits all. You can talk to your oncologist and say, look, how do I personalize my treatment? And you deserve a reasonable, well-informed, well-thought-out answer. Okay. The treatment plans, at least we can speak for this side, are tailored to the patient. Some patients want treatment, different types of treatments. Some patients want treatments quicker. Some patients want treatments which are newer. All right. And of course, those values and preferences matter. Yeah. And the important thing is that that conversation needs to be had. And the first part of that is to realize that you can ask these questions about how your therapy should be personalized. I've talked about it before that one of the key themes going back 10, 20 years is that when a person starts treatment of mesothelioma is actually very personalized. We've known that for a while. All right. Some who have very slow growing disease we can watch. Some patients need immediate treatment, but that theme was already present more than 2 decades ago, that actually you can personalize therapy, timing of it at the very least. Okay. But of course, we know now that it's more than that. And of course, that idea is expanded. Your symptom management can also be personalized. This is for patients and of course for family members to know as well. What is intense pain for one person may not be intense pain for another. What may be breathlessness for one may not be breathlessness for another. So of course, what that's important here to recognize is that even symptom management and how that equates to gains in quality of life should be individualized as an approach as well. And of course, now with the newer stuff that I've talked about, the sequencing of treatments. What do you have first? Chemotherapy. What do you have later? Chemoimmunotherapy, targeted therapy. Whichever therapy that you want, it needs to be discussed in detail what optimal sequencing fits into your plans, your side effect profile, quality of life profile, etc. So that sort of discussion is now possible because the options for treatment have expanded. So we'll talk now about participation, and I think this is really important for especially rare but important diseases, diseases which resonate strongly, especially in our community, like mesothelioma. Okay, so it's a call to arms, really. You need to for patients and family members, they need to be aware that clinical trial participation is the default. So yes, there are standard options which are good, powerful, effective options which exist on the pharmaceutical benefits scheme, but that should not preclude you from seeking out personalized therapy and active participation in clinical trials. That means that you will have access to more treatments because more treatments means potentially longer survivorship. You have close monitoring on these clinical trials by experts. And of course, in rare diseases like this, it's important to contribute to a collective knowledge, a collective legacy, a collective story, so to speak. And patients and families need to recognize that. Yeah. Drug development takes time. So essentially, a treatment which is being trialed in a phase 1 clinical study will take 15 years to reach the clinic, usually. So what that means is that participation in these trials is essentially an opportunity to have treatment that may actually affect survivorship for the better, whilst also contributing to future research, to future therapeutic options as well. The fact that we have these 3 or 4 treatments now, as compared to 1 treatment, is because of the work that's been done throughout 15 years of the drug development pipeline. And of course, I emphasized this already before, that especially with cancers which are rarer but which have significant impact, you need to combine data from multiple sources in order to provide a meaningful clinical picture, research picture, and a proper story which we can understand as a community. So larger sample sizes by participation in research they lead to better research insights. And therefore, that pooled data actually accelerates discovery. Nobody works in isolation. And the sooner we realize this as a community, the quicker our research will go. And I think for the patients and the families, it's really important to realize that it's not either or. So you can participate in research and achieve personal goals, quality of life, spending time with your family, survivorship, etc. All right. Quality of life, of course, remains a priority, and disease control is the main focus. But what the message here is that participation in these trials is essentially a win-win. And it's a definite win-win, both for the patients, the families, as well as the larger community. Now, I think the final thing to end on is just understanding. And this is one of the key themes that we see in our clinics, especially discussing things with mesothelioma patients. And one of the things that's not often realized is that one of the things which we do see is that the patient who comes to us in the beginning after their diagnosis is a very different patient from a knowledge, understanding, even just a persistent standpoint. So it's actually, they develop resolve, they develop strength as they move through their disease journey. This is something that people as clinicians, we have the privilege of seeing that as they come to our clinics, that essentially the anxiety that comes from the initial diagnosis is replaced, at least in some patients, with a sense of understanding, a sense of self-reassurance, and a sense of knowing how to navigate their disease. All right. One of the things that I sometimes see with some of the patients that, for instance, who come to see me for second opinions or anything else is that the first thing that they ask me is, so tell me more about the disease. I have not had a chance to talk about it. And this is what I want to emphasize, that really you should be able to sit down and have a conversation with your oncologist that this is what the disease is about. This is what treatment entails. This is what to expect. Okay. And you're allowed to ask questions. And in fact, it's actually a given in the clinics that you should be allowed to talk about it, to understand it, and to inquire about it in order to prepare for it. Okay. And that awareness that you can ask questions, that you are allowed to obtain more understanding is just as important as giving medicine for the treatment for the cancer. I think one of the really important points, I think thankfully we have very strong advocacy in Western Australia, but it's not only about individuals. That knowledge needs to be shared through the community. I encourage actively patients and family members to talk to each other outside of the clinic areas. And really, the forums for discussion should be patient organizations, which advocacy groups offering and providing support. And really, it is only through that collective understanding that people realize that, oh, actually, that is the standard by which accurate treatment and navigation of disease should be held to. All right. So it's not only about the individual. Everybody needs to sort of understand or be aware that this is how we understand, this is how we navigate the disease together. And the bottom line of all of this is that when one talks between families, between patients, between researchers, it's to get a collective understanding of what the ideal standards should be and what, at least if we were to make that concrete, access to specialist care in centers, access to clinical trials, You need to know that there are other trials, other approaches, other people who deal with the disease, access to resources and, for instance, laboratory techniques, which might yield more therapeutic options for the disease. And therefore, what's important, I think, collectively, research-wise, patients-wise, family-wise, clinicians-wise, is that we're working together for a collective understanding of what the standard of care should be when we're treating sufferers from this disease. Okay? So I think that ends the talk. I've just entitled it or summarized it by saying it's moving forward together. And of course, for the patient to say, well, you're not alone on this journey. Go talk to people. Thank you very much for that.
I think we've probably got time for a couple of quick burning questions if there is anybody. And if anyone online has a quick burning question, if you want to type it in, no? Yep.
Or you're just looking for volunteers who have perhaps had exposure?
There are different types of clinical trials, and although I focused more on the mesothelioma side, there are clinical trials which accept people who have been exposed to asbestos. There are clinical trials which essentially are looking at therapies who require healthy volunteers for some of these medications. And we don't mean, and please do not misunderstand, I don't mean healthy volunteers as in trial participants or guinea pigs. I mean healthy volunteers because a lot of these early phase clinical trials are trials which assess not only the efficacy, potency of treatment, but also other very important things to the drugs like safety, etc. So the short answer to that is that yes, the trial landscape is vast. It's vast. There's always some way of participating in research. And just to reassure you as well, everybody contributes in their own way. So it doesn't necessarily need to be one way as an injection of some medication or some tablet. It could be other ways of contributing, even essentially just by making sure that information is disseminated, but awareness is completed.
I have a question that's probably a little bit contemporaneous to the last couple of 48 hours of news. And I'm just wondering if the Institute has a role or gives any advice to government when we've got things like the clay sand in the schools, potentially containing asbestos, and how one state is saying the schools have to be closed and it's a danger, it's a hazard, and then we have our government saying everything's fine, everybody calm down, the fibres are in the oil, in the sand. And I'm not asking for your opinion because I'm sure you haven't seen the product or know what its consistency is or what it's made of or all of that. What I'm really asking is there a societal role for the Institute in these moments to get involved in the conversation?
That's a really good question to run. And of course, one where there are many, many aspects which I'll try to navigate here. I think perhaps the most relevant here, or perhaps just focusing on narrowing the question down, that the role of the Institute, whether it be in advocacy for research for patients, which I think there is a role if, let's say, it fulfills some sort of benefit for stakeholders. And essentially what that benefit is going to be defined by what important to the group of the organization. I'm not just trying to provide a vague answer.
No, I understand.
I'm not trying to.
It's a loaded question, but
it's because essentially, yes, the Institute has the capacity to participate in many aspects of these discussions, but and of course, what that participation means, let's say, for listeners here, or the people online, or for the broader community in general, is essentially where community. So short of it is that if there are stakeholders here, let's say the research leaders feel that's an important part of prioritizing their stakeholders, then what the stakeholders feel.
so it might fit within the advocacy role externally within the community.
Correct. Right. That's right. It goes back to that messaging.
Yeah.
Because even now, that messaging is not only about treatment, not only about where do I go to search for the next trial. It's also about how worried do I need to be about this particular thing? That's just an important message.
Like you said, knowledge is power.
That's exactly.
That's where we're at. I guess part of that question is, were you asked about it? Yes, that also was part of that. Have you been approached?
I've been approached often to make comments in public. But this particular instance, we weren't asked for a specific comment. And really, as you said, there's quite polarized responses.
Perhaps it's not even asking for a comment. I thought they might come for some information.
Because, well, maybe it's because of squirreled away and the depths of the hospital there, but I've not heard that recently.
The journalists are questioning why there's a discrepancy related to the question. They were asking why there's such a discrepancy between what each state is doing.
Do we have an answer?
I'm gonna move on to the next talk, but I think this is a great discussion, and we do have time at the end to have a nice big group discussion as well. So, and that goes to people online. So when all the lectures are finished, if you want to stick around, and we do have a really nice Q&A time afterwards, and then also after the formal meeting as well, we do have some social sort of gathering outside as well, so we can continue those discussions as well. I think, thank you, Melvin. That was a great introductory talk as well to everything that's going to be covered today. Both from the research side of things and also the communication side of things, which we've got talks on both of those from Jenette for the research side of things, and Yarlalu is going to be talking about the importance of communication, which I think is really fabulous. So next up, we do have Professor Jenette Creaney, who I think all of you here know. I don't think there's very many people who don't, and especially online. If you don't know who Jenette is, she's been a pivotal researcher in mesothelioma, particularly in regards to diagnosis and biomarkers. She was one of the most instrumental people in finding mesothelium, which is one of the best ways of diagnosing mesothelioma still. We've not found many better biomarkers, I don't think, to this date. So I think she's going to give us a really good insight into what is happening here at NCARD. Now she's the scientific director of NCARD. Thanks very much.
So am I taller than Melvin? Can you see me? Okay, so all good? It's not on? Oh, I thought I was nice and close. Oh, that's unusual. Maybe, maybe not.
I've turned a volume up. Is that louder at all? No.
Okie dokie. There's nothing confronting about that. Yes, so I was just going to do a little update on what we've been doing. But as Kofi mentioned, we were recently in Philadelphia. So some of us went to Philadelphia and went to the mesothelioma conference. Now I can't see. So I had the privilege, the honour of telling in the introductory session what was new and what work we'd been doing in Australia lately on research and treatment space. And what became apparent is that we are very privileged in Australia. We are very rich. We've had a ban on asbestos for 20 years. The government is very supportive. We have lots of research infrastructure. We collect lots of data. And so research in Australia is really quite good. But when we look around the world, so this is a map just showing us in the colour the reported incidence of mesothelioma. So the dark blue, you can see Australia, North America and Europe, lots of dark blue. The problem is that a lot of the light blue isn't that there isn't any mesothelioma. It's that it's not been reported. And what was really frustrating for my colleagues from China and India and Africa is that this lack of systems in place to report, diagnose and follow up really makes it quite a stark contrast in what's been able to be achieved. So not meaning to be naff, but really, so I just want to say that I'm just going to show you some of the research that we've been working on lately, but that is because we have the resources to do some of this stuff. So back to little old Australia and back to the National Centre for Asbestos-Related Disease. So one of the resources we have are our people. So as a centre, we've got about 30 people, clinicians, students, scientists, professional support staff. So that's what makes us very good. And we look at the whole research cycle, going from basic biology studies through to preclinical studies, biomarker studies, clinical trials, observational trials, cohort studies. And I thought Melvin was going to tell us a bit about his fancy computer stuff because, yeah. But what I wanted to do today was just talk about two little stories because I'm staring at this and forgotten what I was going to say. The whole tumour biology is, I know, and it was such a good story and I've blown it. So we do all this research. We do all this research over the continuum, and what I frequently get asked at parties, at the school drop-off, at the shopping centre is, have we cured cancer yet? And you know, it's complex. Cancer is complex. Finding treatments is complex. And so what is needed is to understand the biology a bit more, and sometimes that takes time. So if we look at immunotherapy, and Melvin was telling us, you know, that took a long time to get from the discovery where some nerdy little scientists were obsessing over these molecules that were on a specific type of immune cell, and years of laboratory and animal studies to eventually get adopted into the clinic. And so the people who were fundamental in that research in the 90s, they were awarded a Nobel Prize in 2018, Jim Allison and, Tokushu Honjo. And so nowadays what we see is that many people receive immunotherapy, and you may have heard your doctors talking about Ipi-Nivo. So that's the name of the drug that we mostly give in mesothelioma. So, and we know that some people do well, some people just okay, and some people actually get really bad toxicities. And so what is a major interest, global research interest, is trying to figure out which people will respond and which people won't, because when you think about it, that's really what matters. So one of the drugs actually targets this molecule called PD-1, which is what Dr. Honju was working on. And it's a bit more complicated than this, but basically PD-1 targets this other protein called PD-L1, and that's expressed on tumour cells. So in theory, if you have a lot of this protein on the tumour cells, you're more likely to respond well to the treatment. So this beautiful picture, trust me, not all of the pictures are this beautiful, shows what you can see looking at a tumour, looking down the microscope. So this is a real picture of that stylised picture, that cartoon we saw before. So here the tumour cells are stained bright blue and the PD-L1 is stained orange. And if you look closely, what you can see is that some areas of the tumour, there's no orange staining, and other areas there is. So there's, even within a small bit of tumour, there can be quite different staining patterns. And that is a problem if, for example, you had a biopsy and one bit came up and it said it was positive, or if you had the biopsy in a different place and it said it was negative. So one of the things that we've been working on lately is trying to look at a whole body approach, looking at PD-L1 expression in the tumour. So hopefully you're familiar with PET scans. I'm sure some of you have had PET scans. So what we're seeing here is that normal standard of care, people receive PET scans using a glucose radio-labelled tracer. So the glucose is taken up by organs that are eating a lot of glucose and are active, like your brain, and they're shining dark, they're shining bright. So just to orientate, we've got bladder and kidneys and liver. And so the little green arrow is pointing to the tumour, which is just in the bottom of the chest. So the right-hand side is showing us the glucose PET scan. And so we're looking at a new tracer, which is aimed to stain the PD-L1. And we can see on the left that there is nice clean staining within the tumour. My colleague and co-director of NCARD, Ros Francis, is a nuclear medicine physician, and this is her project. And when we zoom into the tumour, you can actually see that there's different areas that are being shiny and not. So this is very, very early days. We've only scanned 5 people with this tracer. But what we're hoping to do, what we're going to look at to see is whether the staining with PD-1 in the PET scan is able to predict who responds and doesn't respond to treatment. So that's, why is that not working? So that's looking big picture, looking at the whole tumour, looking at the whole body. But what we can also do is look small. And so the other project I wanted to show was some single cell work we've been doing where we're looking at individual tumour cells within the tumour. So this nice, simple, pretty picture is actually a lot of data. So in collaboration with colleagues in Norway and Denmark, and also in the building here, profiled tumours from 28 people. So most of them, we had 2 or 3 samples each. So we had 61 samples in total. And that's data from 240,000 cells, and each cell, there's about 500 data points, 5,000 data points. So in terms of data, it's all getting a bit big. But I didn't want to overwhelm you, so I was just going to talk about one patient, one time point, and just looking at the tumour cells. So this picture just shows us patterns of DNA. If you remember, we've got 23 pairs of chromosomes, one from mum, one from dad. And if you remember, Down syndrome, they've got an extra chromosome. So what we're looking at along the bottom is the length of the DNA just going along by chromosome number. And each row that we're seeing here, each row is a single tumour cell. So I'm hoping you can pattern recognition, but if you can't, oops, why are we not going down? We've got two really big places where there's differences going on. So if we look closely here, we can see that these tumour cells at the top, they've all got an amplification in chromosome 14. But this whole group of tumour cells have lost that bit of the DNA. So even within an individual person, even within their own tumour, we've got some serious biology going on. And so what we're hoping is to, if we can understand this biology a bit better, that maybe we can figure out how to overcome treatment resistance in the first place, and maybe develop new treatments. So as Melvin was saying, so what we are hoping for in the future is to personalise treatment but I really was struck terribly by the problem. Is a global problem, and we are in a privileged position to be able to address it. And I would just like to thank especially all the patients and families who donate their specimens for research. And I was almost going to pipe up and say we do have a biobank of samples that we've been collecting from asbestos-exposed people, collecting their blood over the years, which is an actual invaluable resource for biomarker studies. And all the funding bodies whose support has been essential for us to do the work. Thank you.
I think I am, in the interest of time, going to let Jenette get off easy, and you can grill her all after about this. And we will move on to our final speaker today. But thank you very much, Jenette. As you can see, the treatment landscape is not only difficult in the clinic, it's also difficult in the lab as well, with problems like that being shown with the chromosomal rearrangements. There's so many things that we don't really understand about mesothelioma, and mesothelioma is just one disease within the spectrum of cancers, and that's why we don't have a cure yet, but we are all trying to work on improving that. And finally today, we're going to get a really interesting talk, I think, to wrap all of this up with, in terms of everything that's been said by both Melvin and Jenette, is the fact, and the big send-home message is that this is your disease, your patient's disease, and actually being able to understand, and the knowledge of understanding and the knowledge for both of us in the research side of things and also in the clinic is really important. So communication to everybody is one of the most important things to help people get better and better treatments. So I'm really happy to welcome Yarlalu Thomas, Dr. Yarlalu Thomas, to give us a talk today, who does a lot of work in that space of making sure that information is communicated properly, especially to people in communities, so Aborigines and Torres Strait Islander people. He's been awarded a UNESCO, or has been supported by the UNESCO Foundation for this LIFE project to improve communication. And he was also the winner of the 2020 WA Young Australian of the Year award as well. So I think it's a shows that he's doing some really incredible things. So I think big round of applause, and really looking forward to hearing this.
Thank you for that introduction. And just one correction, Ash Barty did beat me in the national award, so I won the state one. But yeah, thank you very much for having me down and giving me the opportunity to talk today. I was just going to touch base quickly on what I'm doing. I'm an Aboriginal man from the Pilbara, and a lot of my focus is to do with Indigenous communities where my families and extended family come from, and making sure that they feel empowered in their healthcare journeys. Just starting off, just quick acknowledgement to country. Wairere, Mirawabu Brady, Ngaju Mili Yarlalu, Ngaju Mili Waran, Miji Maya Balai Kwagaligali, Nyungu Waran, Nyunga Puja, Nyungu Bijungu, double year again. Ejamara Mina Nyapa Margarai, Nyungu Janamili Waran. Just a bit of background information about where I come from. This is my community. For people who are from the Pilbara, it's up near Marble Bar. I think they say that Marble Bar is the hottest place in the state, but I can guarantee you this place is hotter. There's about 16 houses. We have a small primary school, and this is the earliest memory I have as a kid is playing marbles in the red Pilbara dirt. So that's my birth and where I came from, and just talking about the conversations about where we started. It wasn't at Optus Stadium. But I put this photo up because I initially started doing a bit of research and a bit of community outreach programs through rare diseases. And I put this image up because when we talk about rare diseases, we talk about kids alone in WA, there's 60,000. So there's enough to fill up every single seat in that stadium. From there, we have about 1 in 12 of those 60,000 who go through what we call the undiagnosed disease programs. And these are often the most complicated cases in which, I've been fortunate enough to be mentored by Dr. Gareth Bainham, who's the head of rare disease program over at PCH. And I got involved with the Pilbara Face program, which was an initiative to try to diagnose kids with rare genetic diseases through 3D facial technology. And when we talk about the undiagnosed disease program, we found that 25% of these kids were Indigenous, not because they have higher rates of having rare diseases, but because they weren't having the access to get to the stadium and get the healthcare they needed. So we worked with Cliniface, which is partnered through Curtin, and looking at objective measurements in which we can diagnose rare diseases, and looking at their phenotypes. And examples we mentioned tonight is Down syndrome, and that's something I think most people can pick up on in just facial characteristics. And that's the same said for about 6,000 to 7,000 other diseases. There's subtle clues that can help geneticists in picking up a diagnosis, which is just so important for management, for future treatments, and also for giving a diagnosis to the family. Initially, we put my big face in this program, and the reference range data, the closest thing we had was African American faces. And if you can see in the bottom right-hand side, those were the list of the phenotypes that it spat out. And I was a bit worried when we first did this because I thought, oh, I might have a rare disease. But we went out into the communities, went across all the eastern desert, and I spent a year during 2019 working with a lot of my family and traditional people from the desert communities. And we managed to put together a reference range for Aboriginal faces. And at the end of it, we managed to put in my big ugly face and find that nothing's wrong with it. Would you believe? So we're continuing to work on this data set. And what we found so far is that we've picked up, I think, 4 or 5 diagnoses from clinicians using this tool. And they come in the form of, a single measurement of an ear, width of an eye, just very subtle things that give objective markers. And during this process, I had a massive issue with trying to explain what the research was about, what a rare disease is, and, going from the basics about DNA. And I speak my language, Nyangamara, and I just found it an extremely complicated process to go through. And I thought this is, I can't imagine how hard this would be for people who don't speak the language, and more importantly, for families and patients going through other research like this. So there's not a typo in our name when it comes to Lyfe Languages. There's a Y in there on purpose, and that's because we started under the initiative of Project Y, and it's to do with the rare disease program and undiagnosed diseases, and it has to do with our ethos and understanding why things are happening. My reason why is this is my beautiful grandmother, Maywaka Chapman. She walked out of the desert when she was a teenager from living a traditional nomadic lifestyle, and she tells me stories about when she saw, white people and camels for the first time. So she's my reason why, and she's kicking on a bit and has a few health problems like everyone does. And so, being involved over that journey and explaining to her when she speaks 3 different languages, but English isn't one of them, it's an extremely complex process and hard for her to go through. We initially started with me sitting in the red dirt up in the Pilbara, writing down on pen and paper, and we've since evolved with an amazing team. Went on for profit, and we have Dr. Shamir Rind, who's a Geraldton Aboriginal man, and also Dr. Gareth Bain, who I mentioned before. We have, operations manager with Rani and Arthur, who've been amazing in involving what we get up to today. And so I'll just go through that. Just for a bit of background, there's about 300 to 350 different languages spoken across Australia, and 200 to 250 are still actively spoken in our communities. When we look at patient letters, there's words like microcephaly, which are put in patient letters. And I remember reading this for the first time with a science degree, thinking, I have no idea what that means. And so we thought we'd just start with the simple things in translating these terms that often patients come across. And so we did that by doing the human phenotype ontology terms, of which we were able to translate about 1,000 different words. And the importance of these ontology groups is that we could use it for the clinical purposes with the 3D facial technology, and hopefully go for a way in which we can better understand and communicate these to patient groups. Again, another jump scare with my face, but just a few words that is embedded in the imaging software that we use and we can use today to explaining things with families. Another jump scare. And so just talking about what we do and how we do it is we use a youth-driven initiative in which we get young people to help drive this. And it really is one of the, I think, first processes of which we're capturing the digitization of Aboriginal languages. So, we've started off being sort of a medical program and working in communications, but we've realized there's so much more in terms of social impact that we're having out in the communities. Some of the work we do is we explain, like I said, what DNA was, and we come across with analogies and put this in language for people to understand. And so one example talking about chromosomes was linking that to the Dreamtime and song lines, and how people, how we can relate to people like my grandmother and my grandfather in ways that they would understand. And so, chromosomes are the singers for our body, and they provide the information to let us live our lives. We've done a lot of work with the Women's and Infant Health Research Foundation and run workshops up in the Aboriginal Medical Services across the Pilbara. This is one that we do with maternity and also pregnancies for first-time mums. So that's just an example of, being able to scan a quick QR code and have something explained to in someone's language so they can better understand. We've since expanded in terms of what we do. Obviously started in the rare disease space, but realized there's so much more work we can do. We've worked with Lions Eye Health in terms of intravitreal injections, gestational diabetes, expanding on our work with the Women's and Infant Health Research Foundation. And I guess of importance, something that we've been working on recently is looking at clinical trials and informed consent to make sure patient groups understand when it comes to things related to like mesothelioma and clinical trials, and how important it is to, be empowered on that journey. Where we've gone so far is we've had about 17 different language groups in Australia put up their hand to say that they're interested, with about 10 of those actively involved in translations. We've realised that there's so much work outside of Australia as well for First Nations and Indigenous people. We have work done in Ghana where they have the exact same issues. We've work done in New Zealand and also in Malaysia in traditional groups there. So this is just some of the work we've done primarily. As you can see, it's all driven in my language, but we're slowly looking at expanding that. Getting to, I guess, the bulk of my talk today is just like more of a conversation about mesothelioma and how, we can help going forward, and in particular for Indigenous people. who are often overrepresented in a lot of health statistics. I guess the main things that we've noticed along the way is that precision public health is an important thing for a variety of our communities. We go out there to do translations in what might be, diabetes and focus on kidney disease. But we realize, for example, when COVID came around, everyone was affected by that. And so we were the first to translate those terms into Aboriginal languages here in Australia. And, this was something I put up online, and within a few weeks, I heard it was all across the Pilbara in 5 different Woolworths and 10 different Coles. So, we want to respond quickly to the community in terms of what they want and what they want to do. And so I guess with mesothelioma and looking at Bunjima country, it's just, I guess, a sad thing to look at in terms of the stats behind it, but also the impact it has on health, not only health, but for Aboriginal people or the dispossessed people who have that continued issues of not having access to country. The Yarlalu country documentary, I haven't had a chance to watch it, but I'm just looking at the trailer. I know the Parker family, didn't know the late Mr. Parker himself, but I guess the words that resonated from that trailer was, we've got to be extra careful with the young ones, and, early diagnosis is better than a late diagnosis. And so I guess, how we get Aboriginal people more involved in discussions like this and talks like this is how do we get those people to be part of the champion and also the advocacy piece to make sure their voices are heard. So, we're looking at ways forward in which we can further empower that. And, we've had discussions with NCARD about how that looks going forward. So I'm really excited about that opportunity. If there's anyone in the crowd today that has suggestions, please feel free to have a chat with me afterwards. They'd be more than interested, because the work never stops and never will. Just a quick thanks to who supports us along the way and who's been involved. So thank you very much.
So that concludes all of the lectures that we've had today, and I think big thank you to all of our speakers and everyone as well for attending today. And now I'm sure we've all got quite a lot of burning questions. If those online, feel free to stick. No? Oh, there's no one online. Okay. Oh, no questions online. Oh, sorry. If you've got any questions online as well or in person for any of our speakers, but I mean, particularly the last two, we didn't have time to do any questions for Jenette or for Yarlalu. So.
Back in 1998, my father died of mesothelioma, and I came along today because I just really wondered what progress you've made in the last 27 years. He was diagnosed in May 1998, and he was under Professor Musk, and he was 75, very fit and everything, but and he died in 5.5 months. And it was due because he worked at the WA Railways, and they used to take the lagging off the locomotives, drop them onto the ground, and of course it was dormant for 30 or 40 years, and then all of a sudden he started coughing, and then he had 2 litres of fluid drained off his lungs, and that was that. And yes, it was very sad to see him deteriorate in 5.5 months from being a fit and able person. So that's why I came today when I saw about the lecture, because I thought, well, I just hope that you're progressing and getting closer to a curable outcome for this terrible disease.
I think both Jenette and Melvin are probably better suited to answering this question, but just from a perspective, what we've been seeing with treatment improvements, I mean, chemotherapy, like Melvin said, was the first big sort of advance for mesothelioma, and the average sort of time for survival was 12 months. So that was a big improvement at the time for a lot of patients, where it really was a very quick and sudden disease. Immunotherapy, which is the current gold standard, has pushed that out up to almost, is it 22 months from the latest? But the
possible now to
but some patients, yeah.
In fact, we know.
Not very long, is it though?
Not
Yeah.
yeah. So a lot of the work that's focused both at NCARD but also internationally when we went to the recent meeting is trying to find ways to improve adjuvants, so additional treatments that you can do on top of the current treatments to improve the outcome. So the discrepancy in the survival for a lot of the treatments is actually just the difference in people, how they respond. So some people will respond, like Melvin said, can live many years. So the statistics get skewed. So if we can improve those that don't respond well, or get them find alternative treatments that can boost their response rates as well, then the actual survival will be significantly increased. But there is a lot of work in that space that's being done.
Dr. Thomas, I'm trying to get an understanding of your work life, your day in the life of, because what you've just shown and described to us is phenomenal. It's extraordinary, and I want to know more about it. How did you come to? I'm trying to understand. So, do you work in public health? Are you who's? I saw your thanks to different organisations. So, where does the groundswell for your funding come from? How is this?
Yeah, so a lot of us is through Stand Parent of recent, but initially just with the Roy Hill Community Foundation. So along the way, just picking up grants here and there, but we've definitely spent it down with Stand Parent, big supporter. But yeah, entirely philanthropic at this point.
And so you work in public health.
He has a day job.
I'm sorry, I need to figure
Yeah,
out.
I work as an intern at Charlie's. So
Okay.
getting through, cycling through the different departments. But yeah, I currently do that, and then when I can fit my time in, on this side.
Oh, it's congratulations. It's a phenomenal initiative. I'd like to know more about it. Yeah.
It would be really good to sort of have a in-depth discussion with this. One of the things which defined Mr. Parker was the fact that he actually participated in some of the chemotherapy trials, which controlled the disease for a really long time. And there's essentially not as much uptake in communities who are affected as much by this disease. And even though we've actually offered to fly them down everywhere in Western Australia, the car companies will pay for the plane tickets, but we've not had much uptake. And I suspect that just the communication part, it would be really nice to sort of be that for the future.
Absolutely. Just one other thing I guess I'll share with everyone is just, talk about having engagement with Indigenous population, just from the story that I've got permission from my auntie. She's helped on a rare disease as part of the clinical trial, but she also speaks English as the second language. And from her most recent outpatient visit specialist, the end of the conversation was "You're finished," which in Aboriginal words means you're going to pass away.
Oh, yeah.
So she walked away and stopped taking her medication, ended up being admitted to hospital, and followed up. Specialist asking what happened when you stopped taking medication. She explained all this. And, it's just simple things like that. It's just massive consequences.
Yes. I mean, what it raises is perhaps the need to make sure that there is someone that will be able to sort of understand both English language, I guess, and that the Aboriginal uptake.
Yeah.
I mean, you've recently finished your medical degree, like obviously quite fresh in. Was there much in your degree covering that sort of communication?
No, not particularly, and it's just like interesting making that switch, the internship, and seeing it in practice and how much of a problem it is that I think it's not really flagged, and that's what sort of passionate me to go forward with. But yeah, there's something that's not really taught in university curriculum.
Yeah.
Sounds like you need to write a unit.
So he needs another job.
Someone.
Thank you for that. I'll go get in touch very soon. Okay. Yeah. You and Charlie, don't you?
Yeah.
Do we have any more questions for any of our speakers today?
When you're talking, identify maybe where the biopsy exactly should be taken to maybe get more accurate results for the biopsy?
I don't think in the short term. I think we're still a couple of years away from it being clinically takeable. Yeah. So at the moment we're still going with the glucose because that's.
Any more burning questions? No? If not, we can give everyone a round of applause for their wonderful talks today. Huge thank you to everyone who's come out and also joined us online. And for those that are still here, we're going to have some refreshments outside and a good chance to have a little chat as well, a bit more personal if you've got any other sort of questions you wanted us or little things you want to have a little dig into about. So thank you very much for joining us and lovely talks, everybody. Thank you.